Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and I just got back from the new film Avengers: Age of Ultron. One of the ways that this film is different from the first Avengers, there's not that feeling of this has never been done before. And I think as comic book movies advance and we keep making sequels and having more continuity and having a shared universe, you're not really going to have that first, that, oh my god, blank see blank has finally made it to the big screen. And it's an interesting world to be in at that point. The thing with comic book movies, I think they're more famous for origin stories, really, but if you've read comics for years and years, it's not like you read origin stories for years and years. You read the continuing adventures of that superhero team or that superhero. And Avengers: Age of Ultron reflects that. It has a lot more in common with, theoretically at least, like Avengers issue 45 than it does Avengers issue 1 in the Ultimates. And that's really the Avengers. This feels like an Avengers adventure. And that's a crazy thing to see on screen. And I actually don't think I've seen a film use a shared universe and use continuity as well as Age of Ultron does. There's other films that have done it, like X-Men Days of Future Past and the previous Phase 2 Marvel movies, but this one just could not really exist without having set up like what happened in Winter Soldier and what happened in Iron Man 3. It wouldn't work as well. I wouldn't be able to understand the characters as well. And that's very Marvel Comics. Marvel Comics was always known for its deep continuity. You'd be reading them and they'd always have a thing underneath that said see issue 133 or see way back to issue 45, and that's what Marvel Comics has always been known for. So in a lot of ways, most of the Marvel comics that were ever made are more represented in Age of Ultron than we've probably ever seen a Marvel comic book story made before for the big screen. The Avengers, who after they take down a Hydra base, find Loki's scepter that was taken by Hydra and bring it back, and it's supposed to go to Asgard, but Tony Stark decides that he is going to investigate it and learn from it for 3 days before Thor takes it to Asgard, and he discovers a brain-like computer substance which he uses to make artificial intelligence, which he hopes will protect the Earth. And while Jarvis is running various test models and they have a party, Ultron creates himself and takes over and decides the best way to protect humanity is to destroy it, and the Avengers have to stop him, even though he has the help of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, and he's using them to fight the Avengers as Scarlet Witch tears them apart, and they have to band together to stop Ultron from destroying the Earth. One of the other ways this is more like the Avengers comic book movie than the first one is you have characters other than Hawkeye from the first one who were just characters who really existed from the Avengers comic book, and those are particularly Ultron and Vision. Ultron was really considered the Avengers villain, and they're also kind of super dorky comic book characters, and this is a super dorky comic book movie. It's almost a little crazy watching it and thinking like, wow, this is a super expensive, very anticipated big pop culture movie, and it almost doesn't feel like it because it's so representative of storylines that if I told someone I was reading a really good Avengers storyline back in the day, it's not like they'd really want to talk to me about it. And it is a little weird seeing this brought to the screen. It's also the cool thing about Marvel as a studio. It's kind of one of the studios I've always had a lot of faith in, because they make reliably good movies, but they also make the kind of movies they should for the source material. They're making the right kind of movie for the source material, and in a lot of ways, Avengers: Age of Ultron is kind of like the ultimate Avengers movie, because it reminds me more of all those cool Avengers stories that I read in Avengers comic books. It very much fits with the characters, it very much works for the film, and it shows a real faith in its source material at the same time as being like very dorky and very comic booky and very Avengers comic booky, and almost feeling like a 70s Avengers comic book. But like the way it was shot reminds me a lot of Brian Hitch, who drew the Ultimates, which was more of an influence on the last Avengers movie. The way they framed everyone during fights and stuff reminded me a lot of Brian Hitch's art, which was very influential for a little bit. The last one felt like that kind of classic Avengers, like that John Byrne kind of Jack Kirby kind of stuff, and this, the story felt like an older Avengers story, but the framing and the way they shot it felt a lot more like Brian Hitch and more of a modern Avengers comic. That was an interesting marriage of the two, I thought. That also might be because this was not shot by the same person who shot the first Avengers first film. This film was shot by Ben Davis. Even though it's doing all those things, Marvel still makes very big Hollywood, corporate, easy to digest movies. This one and the last three have been films that are like theoretically not very digestible, but come out very digestible. Guardians of the Galaxy should not have worked as well as it did, but it's a really good, really amazing, very Hollywood fun movie. And Avengers Age of Ultron keeps that spirit alive, and Joss Whedon, who's amazingly good at doing these films, like you can tell he respects comic books, that he made such a very comic book movie. I feel like he upped the comic bookness in this somehow, but also it's such a tightly written script. It's like an expertly written script. There's things that are just little jokes that come back that really say something about the story, and the audience gets it. It's interesting if you think about both of his Avengers films. They're tightly written, but it also, like, the audience gets that it's tightly written. There's things that the audience gets just through dialogue and then laughs because it's a great callback. And that's not an easy thing to do in a film that's this crowded with so many characters and ideas and plot lines and whatnot. I always feel like when I see an Avengers film, the first one and this one, I felt like the first time I see them, I feel like I'm not seeing everything. It's just such an experience that I kind of understand why people go back to these movies for repeat viewings, because it just feels very overwhelming the first time I see an Avengers movie, just because there's so much going on. And this felt even worse than the first time in terms of that, at least. I also like that this film, through its continuity, with something Marvel's always done really well with its continuity, is show how, like, that there's never like a happy ending where they've defeated the bad guy and life can move on, they're heroes. There's no thing where you're gonna get married and have a bunch of kids and then there's a happy ending and life's over. That's completely unrealistic, and I think that's one of the ways that Marvel has made itself more relatable, is that it shows life better. It shows how life always has challenges and there's new things that are going to hit you. There's never that point where like everything's going to be okay, and it lets the characters grow, gives you more continuity, continues their adventures. It also allows them to make more comic books and movies, so maybe there's a financial thing with it, but let's just go with the idea that it's more like life. And I love laughing in a Marvel film with an audience. That's something I think I've always liked about these Marvel movies, is there's just such a oneness with the audience, that communal atmosphere that you really get from an Avengers film. They don't really rely as much on Captain America, Iron Man, and Thor as they did in the last one. It almost feels like they're like, well, those jerks have their own movie, let's focus on all these other people. Those three are kind of more confined to like just doing like the plot elements of the film. All three of the actors, like Chris Evans and Downey and Hemsworth, seem to be able to take on very well and almost understand it's like they have to play rhythm guitar and let everyone else take the lead. And they're actually very comfortable with doing that. You don't even notice it bothers them or that it's a different kind of performance. They don't get to do as much as normal, but I think that really actually works for Age of Ultron because it like lets you understand the rest of the team. That's the thing about when you're going to do a team movie, you want it to be more of a team, and with the Avengers it worked last time, but we didn't really get into Hawkeye. Specifically this one I think almost feels like more of a team film. It also flows a lot better than the first film. The first film takes a while to get really going, get you really into it. Then when it has you, it has you. It's so passionate when it gets you, but the opening sequence really just does not work, that opening sequence in the first film. The opening sequence in this film is thrilling. It really feels like you just open an Avengers comic book and they're just throwing you into the action. The opening feels like a real sequel to the Avengers, more so than the rest of it. The rest of it feels like the continuing continuity of the Marvel universe, which was always something Marvel almost cared more about, and that's the story within itself. And so I know Joss Whedon said things like, oh, I want this film to work as a direct sequel to the first film. You don't have to have seen all those other films. I think that's bullshit. I think it actually very much helps that you understand what Cap has gone through and where Tony Stark is. And Thor, I mean, Marvel's really thankful you saw it. I don't know. There's really not that much there with Thor. It's still a dark world, I guess. It definitely like needs that continuity to truly work. The beginning is more about that follow-up, and then the rest is just like, where's the natural place to put these characters? And I think that's something like Marvel itself was always really good at, and that reflects very much in Age of Ultron. The team as a whole has such great charisma. When they're having that opening sequence and they're having banter back and forth, there's just such great charisma between the team members. It's just infectious. It's like that great Hollywood chemistry. It makes it more relatable. It kind of makes you feel like you're hanging out with old friends. And that's something that's in a Marvel comic book when you see them fighting a bad guy and they have witty repartee. Chris Evans, I feel like he gets better at the Captain America role as these films keep going. Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man is just as fun as he usually is, since I haven't actually seen Robert Downey Jr. be good in anything since like Iron Man 3, which was 2 years ago. It was actually kind of fun to see him again, to be honest. At least he wasn't judging it up again. Chris Hemsworth was fine. I liked how they used Hawkeye a lot better and gave Hawkeye more of a soul and made him a lot funnier. A lot of people say he's the heart of the team, that you get to see more of a side of him and you get to see what's going on in his life. Really like fleshes out the character and makes you care a lot more about Hawkeye. Scarlett Johansson builds on the amazing presence she has as Black Widow and showing how she's one of those essential building blocks to the Avengers. Mark Ruffalo is again excellent as Hulk. He's not as funny as last time, but he was basing on more of the Peter David run, and you can actually kind of tell that in his performance. So when you get to the new people, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, the biggest disadvantage to him is he kind of got outdone by the guy who played him in X-Men Days of Future Past. That Quicksilver had a much more memorable scene. He got his own kind of showcase scene. In Age of Ultron, they don't really have as much fun with Quicksilver. Elizabeth Olsen is such a great choice for Scarlet Witch. I think she gets like how reserved she is. She gets how angry she can be. My biggest problem with them is like they talk like, oh, is this a good accent? No, I do not understand. I am Scarlet Witch and this is my brother Quicksilver. Then you get to Vision, and I think the thing with Paul Bentley as Vision is that I hate the design, but I love Paul Bentley as Vision. He is so good as Vision, it's just unreal. He's like Vision personified. He's exactly who Vision should be, but the design, I just don't like it very much. He's such a weird kind of character. I guess maybe that's why, and they don't really get into like what his powers are. Paul Bentley, he is Vision on screen. It's such a good performance. I'm not in love with the design. At least he's not all white. I don't like that Vision design. They got the right colors, they just didn't do it right. Ultron, who's voiced by James Spader, doesn't feel like the Ultron from the comics. It feels like Joss Whedon's interpretation of Ultron, but it was an excellent interpretation of Ultron. Probably of Phase 2, he's probably my favorite villain. I don't think he's better than Loki. James Spader is almost like one of those actors who's like born to say good Joss Whedon dialogue. Everyone says Marvel has a villain problem. I didn't feel like this film had a villain problem as much. There's other things that like you could have done with Ultron. You could have done more of the Oedipal thing, but they didn't. But I think this film had so many things going on. We did not need to get into Oedipal relationships, but this movie was like 2.5 hours as it was, so it's probably best we didn't. This was a very good, a real true Avengers movie. It gets the kind of film that it needs to be for its source material. This is the kind of Avengers movie that should happen. It has some amazing action sequences. The Hulkbuster Hulk fight is cool. I like the opening fight. I like how they deal with destruction and are smarter about it. This is a film that cares about being a fun, dorky comic book kind of story and does it really well. Probably better than we've seen a movie really get into before. And it's fun to see kind of a dorky kind of Avengers kind of story on the screen as well as it does. And I think it shows the faith Marvel Studios has in Marvel Comics and how it wants to represent them on the screen. It is still an entertaining kind of like the system works kind of Hollywood movie, and it holds up that tradition that Marvel's had going throughout it and what Joss Whedon started with the first Avengers. I think this film flows better than the first film and has probably some better action sequences from it, but I don't get that thrilling feeling I get from the Battle of New York from the first film. I'd probably say Guardians of the Galaxy is probably the film I'd rank higher than this in my Phase 2. I can't say in terms of the Marvel films, there's too many movies, but definitely kind of like keeps my faith going with this studio and makes me kind of happy that they're making comic movies for dorks. That's the cool thing about the Marvel Studios specifically. They kind of, in a way, don't give a fuck. They're like, we're Marvel, so deal with it. Deal with the fact that we have made a very much a Marvel movie. We're not going to try to change it and make it darker. Even though this is a little thematically darker, it's trying to be the kind of thing it should be for an Avengers movie. The fun of these movies hasn't gone away. The friendliness, the Hollywoodness is never going to leave these studios. These are going to always be amazing, awesome, big summer tentpole films. In Age of Ultron, that tradition has stayed alive. So if you have seen Avengers, Age of Ultron, and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments. and subscribe if you would like to. And check out my Marvel Cinematic Universe review playlist. I've reviewed all the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and you can watch all of my reviews on that playlist. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.